you. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. Just to reiterate what Emily said, we'll be focusing on changing precipitation patterns today. So that includes both change in extremity and as well as lack of precipitation as well. So just to kind of go over the agenda, first we'll start with a welcome. We'll have the people at the table introduce themselves. I know for each one of these, we're having a few different people who are coming in and out. So we'll start with, again, reiterating the purpose and goals of these workshops, as well as go into a presentation on what changing precipitation patterns are going to look like, specifically in Island County in the future. And then we will open it up for discussion. And again, as Emily said, we'll focus this discussion with people at the table. And then in the last 20, 25 minutes or so, we'll open it to the rest of the audience as well. In the middle, we'll have an exercise where people can write down their priorities and concerns. So we definitely want to invite the audience to grab a bunch of sticky notes here. And we'll be gathering all that input and feedback from both the audience and people at the table to have that lead our discussion. All right, so would everybody like to, who's at the table, introduce themselves, say your name and what organization you're affiliated with?
I am Jake Stewart, small farmer, mid-scale farmer, representing small to mid-scale farming interests, scientist by training, but farmer by choice.
John Lobby, I'm representing Whitby Island Water Systems Association, ex-president of that organization, former member of the Island County Water Resource Advisory Committee, when we still have one, and general clean drinking water advocate.
Christina Hines, Executive Director, Executive Director of the Economic Development Council for Island County.
I'm Greg Easton. I'm representing the Marine Resources Committee, also a commissioner for South Whitby and the chair of the Langley Planning Advisory.
Perry Lovelace, representing Whitby Climate Action, and also a commissioner for the Bayview Beach Water District. And I'm here.
And I'm Marty Jackson, and I'm here in my role as Executive Director of Whitby Environmental Action Network.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. So just to go over the general purpose and goals of this workshop. So first, the purpose is that we are, as the consultants, supporting Island County in helping develop the climate element, which John will help to kind of discuss the climate element and what that is, just at a high level. So we'll be doing that every workshop. But essentially, our task is to write policies to build resiliency in Island County. So what we want today is to ensure that our policies are adequately addressing the priorities and the concerns of the community and people who live here. So really today, what our goal is to inform the audience on our findings, specifically for changing precipitation for today. With the other workshops, we're focusing on other climate hazards. And we really want to understand what is your professional experience and kind of working in this space and what your perceptions are of this climate hazard, what are we missing, as well as trying to understand what is going to be of utmost importance to prioritize to help us establish really great policies. Okay, so what is the climate element? The climate element is a brand new piece of legislation that now requires that comprehensive plans have a climate element. Part of that climate element is a resiliency sub-element. So that's focusing on understanding how climate change is impacting a place. So that place for us today is Island County, and trying to understand who's vulnerable and how we can address and create policies that help to build adaptation in face of this changing climate. So the resiliency sub-element has 3 requirements. So requirement 1 is assessing natural hazards that are created and aggravated by climate change. So 1, you look at a climate hazard, and 2, you kind of look at other things that may come from that hazard, which we will discuss today. But For example, increased extreme precipitation often results in increased landslide risk. Two, the second requirement is identify, protect, and enhance natural areas that foster resilience. And then the third requirement is identify, protect, and enhance community resilience. So we definitely want to make our natural spaces buffers that help to build resilience, as well as make sure that people are not being negatively impacted by these different climate impacts and associated hazards. So here's just an overview of the process. So initially, we had a data gathering phase where we did an assessment of existing plans, existing policies, as well as did our own assessment on what are the impending hazards and what are the risks that come with those hazards. And then we also did a full analysis of assessing vulnerabilities. What is vulnerable to that hazard? So that the kinds of assets include transportation systems, communities, residential houses, the list goes on, and other like natural spaces. And now we are at the phase where we want to start to write policies and goals that will be put into the comprehensive plan. And this is really why we're here today, is to receive some feedback from you and the community to make sure that the goals and policies are really well aligned with the community needs. All right, I'm going to hand it over to John, who will discuss changing precipitation.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Phillips with Parametrics, assisting the county with looking at the climate element, which is, like Susie said, it's new. There's a very high-level roadmap on how we do it, but what we've been doing is kind of applying a lot of what we know about looking at climate action and climate resiliency and applying it to what we've worked really well for the county and their comp plan as they update it. You go to the next slide. So, changing precipitation overview. Basically, the key takeaway from this is the way it rains is going to change. But we're going to use the word precipitation when we're talking about climate projection, because we want to also not forget about our favorite subject, which is snow, because precipitation includes both rain and snow. So we say precipitation, but mostly rain, and we want to see how that impacts the community. But also, what do those projections look like? And one of the things I want to say about these climate projections for rain is you'll see some percentages and some numbers up there. And that's kind of the average. So all this looking ahead has a various degree of uncertainty around it, right? If we could predict the future very accurately, we'd be working in Vegas. See that. But what we want to do is say, like, okay, we want to look at these certain percentages and changes over time, how many days, different percentages, different volumes and amounts of rain that might occur, and what are the kind of highs and lows, right? What could be a really high impact kind of storm that might hit versus what kind of risk that might entail over time, especially when you're looking at infrastructure, when you're looking at how that impacts runoff and things like that. So there's a lot of uncertainty around this. Further out in years we go, so like we'll look at two things. We're going to look at kind of a mid-century 2050 and a late-century 2080 number. That's kind of a way to kind of get an idea of where things are going. Further out in the future, again, the more uncertainty there is. A lot of that uncertainty is actually driven by what we, the global we, do as far as reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Right? So that's a big driver for this uncertainty. So we have lots of different scenarios we can think about. So the big takeaway message is overall annual precipitation, you'll see the numbers will slightly increase or slightly decrease, but stay relatively the same. It's just going to come in a shorter period of time. And so our winters will be wetter and our summers will be drier, to kind of put it in a very colloquial term of that. That's the shift we'll see. We'll see a lot more drier summers. We'll see a lot more wetter winters. Next slide. So then we talk specifically about the way we look at different types of storms. There's kind of a heavy storm and an extreme storm. An extreme storm usually are tied to some of the things you hear about on your local weather channel. And I will say the Seattle meteorologists are great at understanding these because they're having to deal with them all the time. The idea of an atmospheric river, the large swath of precipitation or large swaths of water vapor that comes up to the Pacific Northwest and dumps a lot of rain all at once. Vancouver, British Columbia just went through last week. They had two in sequence, and they got really hit hard with rain. to put it lightly. So that's something we look at. We think about extreme. Heavy precipitation are those storms that we're used to seeing around here when it's not just the regular kind of northwest mist that we normally get. And you see those increases, and it increases over time, even out to the late century. Like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty of what that exactly will be, but you could figure a 1.5 inch volume of rain in a 24-hour period can easily jump up to 1.8 to 2 inches of volume of rain in a 24-hour period, which, if you think about it, that's a lot of rain for us. If you're from the Southwest, they kind of giggle and say, what? 1.5 inches in 24 hours. We are a dry climate. Our west of the meridian that, everybody judges where it's either dry or wet. So we are kind of a desert. Those rains are significant. They're important. There's not a lot of places for that water to go. And some of the things we want you all to think about is what to do with that water. If we're going to get more water in the winter, what can we do to keep that water when it gets drier? And some things to think about in the back of mind. So that's kind of the takeaway message we want you to think about as we look at these impacts from precipitation is that's great. What can we do about it? We can help out a little bit, but mostly it's for you to think about. Next slide, please. Then drought. Drought's kind of interesting to think about here in the Pacific Northwest. We do get a lot of drought seasons up here. They do declare droughts. The number of days without rain is the day what you're looking at, and the number of days will increase. We just kind of had a nice little close to near record this spring without consecutive days without any rainfall. So those are the type of things too. Again, that's that impact, right? Drier summers, drier springs, wetter winters. What do you do with all that water? You can see that actually is growing, and I would say that variation at the end of the century is quite high. It actually goes clear up into almost a whole 3 months of potentially having no rain, which is an extreme look at model, and it's a certain model, one model run. This is kind of an average of a lot of different. When I talk about models, there's these global circulation models that are run. They call them GCMs, and they run them worldwide, and then people have to actually take that information and use it in models that actually predict the weather here in the Pacific Northwest. When I say weather, it is a weather model. It's the same weather model the meteorologists use, same weather model they use at UW Atmospheric Science. They look at how that would actually impact the Pacific Northwest. But there's a wide degree of uncertainty on how it's going to rain here in the Pacific Northwest. It rains a lot here, but we're famous for it, but we know very little about it. Next slide. So the next thing we want to talk about, once we just talk about that precipitation changes, we want to talk about compound hazard. We want to talk about put all those things together and what's really going to happen to our landscape, to our ecology, to our communities. So when we talk about these impacts, we want to start putting together and look at what happens when it rains a lot and we start getting this loose soil. We start seeing landslides. What happens when it doesn't rain a lot? It rained a whole bunch in the spring, stops raining around July, starts getting really hot. All that great new green growth starts getting really dry. So that could lead to the wildfires. And no one in the Pacific Northwest is immune from wildfires, especially moving out into the future, especially if you start seeing these changing patterns of very wet and very dry. Next slide. This is kind of a fun one. We worked with a team, and our team that's supposed to do hazard management planning, and said, what's that impact on landslide? How can you do that other than showing the graphic pictures of hillside sloughing off? What else could we show? This is a value. This is out of the Island County Hazard Management Plan. This is a property value look at how we talked about property value here and sea level rise to bring it up again here of how many buildings are exposed to potentially having landslides. Just something to keep in the back of our head as we're starting to look at how things are done, what kind of land use is there, what kind of decisions need to be made in the future about what to do about this if that increased risk of landslides keep going up. Of course, landslides do more than just damage homes. They can damage roads. They can take out infrastructure like pipes. They can make the drain field a little smaller. Things like that. You also have to think we can work trying to compound these hazards to all the things that happen because of that. Next slide. And back to wildfires. So really great. The Washington State Department of Natural Resources put out a new what's called Wild Urban Interface, or we call it WUI short, map of where are those areas that have contact between buildings and structures and natural areas that are called where wildlands can actually start burning. Right? It's not a risk map. It's not saying these are the areas that are at most risk, but it is a map to kind of look at from a planning perspective of where are structures and where are structures close to that wildland area, and how many are there, and what does it look like? So on this map, the red is actually less interface, and that's what it's actually called. Red area is called interface zone, and the yellow area is the interface. That means a house may actually be surrounded by wildlands or forest. And if you look at an aerial photograph, it's really easy to see it, but it does take a while to make these maps. And then the green areas are actually the natural areas, right? Those are the large areas we probably can identify each of the state parks associated with. And then the gray areas, of course, are the urbanized areas, which here are the beyond is part. Next slide. So the way we would use these maps is to actually identify like land use changes and how does this map change. If we put more housing or more urbanized areas, where does this map go? What's being changed? What's the dynamic around that? And where should we focus some of that? That's what Washington DNR. If you go to our story map site, we actually have a direct link to Washington DNR because they do a really, really good job of explaining this and walking through it. Much better than I can. Next. And then, of course, the environmental aspects of the drought. We talked about the declared drought. Right now, we're coming up into that declared drought. Pretty much covers most of the state, including Island County. And we should point out here that Island County, most of you probably know, is a sole source aquifer. There's not many of those around the country. It's interesting. There's a dynamic there that's important to think about. And the funny thing is of all the very few sole source aquifers in Washington, we're working on another community resiliency plan on the other one over on the east side. It's extremely important to think about that. Right? It's saying that you have the groundwater you have here is the groundwater you get. Some areas of groundwater are fed by natural springs. Some areas are fed by lots of snowmelt and things like that. That's kind of what puts you in a unique situation of being an island. You in Hawaii and other islands where they have the groundwater right underneath them, that's what they're drinking. So we want to keep that as we walk these. Right. And there it is. We just talked about that slide. I knew this. Something to think about as far as actions is how to retain that water in your aquifer. Make sure that water doesn't go off into the Puget Sound, things like that. Things to think about. How to keep that close to you, how to keep that charged over time. I know we're going to have some really good discussions on that. Questions and hear from the folks around the table. That was my 27 show. Around the table, questions, comments?
Thank you. Good presentation. Some feedback on the thinking about the way policymakers look at numbers and often walk away with numbers. I think given the uncertainty, maybe some of the specific quantification that's listed, like increase of 11%, might be better served in brackets and or range, given maybe that's what you're planning on doing. But I think that would be helpful for both the reader and those that aren't really tuned into the different models. And maybe also a note stating where we are in relation to low, medium, and high scenarios, because we're banding outside the high scenario. So I think giving that context to some of these numbers, because someone could just perusing could see, oh, we're getting 11% more water, we're good, and not realize it's a seasonal shift means that that extra water is going away. But just some quick feedback.
Yes.
I noticed on the slide just before this, you move back a slide, Susie. That's the key question. We have no clue about the relationship between precipitation, recharge, and extraction. And that is a huge hole in our data. I don't see it anywhere in any of the work so far.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have data or else we can't figure out how they're going to work. And they're long term.
I agree.
I'm also interested in understanding what we know or can predict about the Skagit River and the allocation that currently comes to Naval Air Station and Oak Harbor in terms of the trends with that water availability over time and the number of people with water rights upstream of Oak Harbor and what the impact on local infrastructure and our sole source aquifer would be if Oak Harbor needs to shift to local wells.
I will say, and I know because we're working with the city manager, that they are doing a water resiliency plan for the Skagit and their specific water treatment plant. They started that, I believe, last year, and it's a kind of a collaboration with the Skagit County Climate Collaborative. Very nice website, SKCC. Really nice website, and they kind of kicked that off with the University of Washington. Very interesting group of folks that are on that collaborative that are doing a water resiliency plan for Skagit River. Same exact questions they have too. They're trying to get the answers to. And I do know, and someone from county staff can say that there's kind of close to a kickoff for a water planning effort here within Arlington County as well, which would be one of our major recommendations, as you said, do the work, do the study to understand what the impacts are. Because I don't disagree with what you said, that it's important to have that information and data, as how much of that information and data is actually available for this, and how much uncertainty is there, which can be an action, believe it or not.
Should be an action.
Going back about 10 years, the first Island County Water Resource Advisory Committee meeting I ever attended, I wasn't on it yet. The discussion was about the Navy's well that they just drilled at the Gary Golf Course, ostensibly to water the golf course. That well had a capacity of 1,200 gallons a minute, and they don't run it. But when they tested it, it dried out a bunch of neighboring wells pretty quickly. If something happens to the supply in the Skagit River, I think we're pretty much assured that the Navy's going to be okay. People in the surrounding area, maybe not so much. But so I'd be curious what their plans are.
Oh, go ahead.
So I just wanted to say that part of the comprehensive plan mandate is that the county does climate resilience sub-element, and so do each of the cities. And so
Yeah.
Harbor is doing the same process for their plan.
Right.
And certainly we're
And how about the Navy? Are they doing one as well, or is the federal government law unto itself on that?
They, I don't think, are subject to GMA rules, yeah, so no, they're not doing that, but we were hoping to have them here today to sit at the table, but they're not, yeah, they weren't able to show, so.
But they are required. The Navy, all military, DOD has made a requirement that all
Yeah.
installations do climate action planning with their local community,
With
not against it, not even like that.
That is
And
true.
that is good with, yeah, precipitation, our participation.
Oh, Brian Tyler's great, yeah. Yeah,
So,
good. I just want to make sure that somebody's looking at that. That's awesome.
thank you.
And to the comment about, needing data and needing study of how much is, as things shift, we don't know currently how much, what our recharge rate is. So we're really operating in sort of an amorphous space to begin with, as we're doing rapid development planning. So as a farmer and representing farmers, who all of which are on wells, that's our livelihood. So that degree of uncertainty is unacceptable. And so I don't think any other sector would accept that uncertainty going forward. But from the community perspective, it's also system. So I think some of this stuff can kind of get pushed off as, well, we'll deal with that when we get to it. But like we heard in the last session, the future is now. And I think that level of emphasis, sometimes we start thinking about things in a 40-year plan or 20-year plan. But I think, delivering the degree of urgency that's required for these problems to be solved now, not in the next cycle, or even it is, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I think that's a big takeaway that I heard in the last session in this one.
And I totally agree. Yeah, to a degree, I think House Bill 1181 and doing these resiliency planning. And there's a lot of communities that have been doing resiliency planning for over 10 years in Puget Sound region. But to have it actually come out now and say it is more urgent. And I totally agree with that urgency. And that's something you should reflect in the action. I mean, they're actions are actions, right? When do you need to do it by? What do you need to do?
Right. And I think what a lot of us are saying is the planning aspect is important. And this is a helpful discussion. The policy is what's going to matter. And I think that needs to get pushed up into immediacy.
To Jake's point, I think I have had a gap in understanding around the sequencing of adopting an updated comprehensive plan and making our codes and ordinances match the vision laid out in that plan. I had been under the impression that those things would happen somewhat simultaneously, so that by the adoption deadline of December 2025, we had a guiding document and codes and ordinances that matched the vision laid out therein. Am I mistaken in that impression?
I'm gonna let Emily
I
answer.
can answer. So our comprehensive plan mandates that when we adopt a comprehensive plan, our zoning has to be adopted with the comprehensive plan. They give us an extra year to do things like our critical areas ordinance and bring our other policies into compliance, which is great because as a team of 3 over here, that's a lot to take on all at once. So that is our plan. That we're going to adopt the comp plan and any required zoning changes that support the comp plan. And we shift gears into doing our critical areas ordinance update.
That's great.
Okay.
And so to that end, I will acknowledge that Island County is moving forward on 2 really important buckets of work. One being taking another look at our public benefit rating system, which is a program that, if it's reformed and revitalized, it could incentivize more landowners to protect the parts of our island that do the most to recharge our aquifer, give them a bigger opportunity to get into that program, and a greater tax incentive to get into that program so that the forests keep sinking the groundwater. And the other being consideration of some policy changes that would slow rainwater, keep it on the island, and sink it into the aquifer through reform of how we treat drainage areas and through establishing all of Island County as a critical drainage area. So I just want to thank the staff and the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners and the folks who probably aren't here today from Public Works around seeing the importance of those opportunities and putting them on the 2025 work plan rather than punting to 26.
Let's save our gratitude until they pass it. I agree with you.
Fair.
So, picking up on some of the things that Lonnie and Jacob brought up there, some suggestions on how we might be able to kind of prioritize some of these things. I think it's going to be useful to take a look at the island on a watershed basis because it's really not uniform. We have some canaries in the coal mine. We have parts of the island that are going to see these impacts before others do. And I'm thinking particularly of actually this area around Coopville and the Prairie. We have challenges around here with drinking water. We have perhaps more drinking water quality issues here initially. And then we do have concerns with PFAS from OLF. What we see typically in various places is we'll see discharge flows out towards the sound in certain areas. There's a good one right here, it flows out down towards Crockett Lake. Unfortunately, that is carrying that PFAS with it. The Cooper area has some advantages. It is stiff with monitoring wells. We have a bunch of them around OLF. There's a bunch around the landfill as well. So it's a great place to start looking to see if we're starting to see some of those changes that we're concerned about in changes in aquifer level, or because our aquifer really is floating on salt water, we may not see the top of that aquifer come down as we come. We may see the bottom of it come up. So we need to be concerned about seawater intrusion. And again, there's got to be certain, and you know, Chris has a great map of where that's already an issue. So we know where the hotspots are. We can go look to see if that's getting any worse. Same thing with drainage areas. There's somewhere that's going to be a lot more critical. So yes, all of it, but how about doing that in phases? And so look at the drainage areas that are more critical first. So maybe not immediately look at places like Cultus Bay, Max Welton, Lone Lake, Deer Lagoon, which have a lot of water in them at the moment. Maybe look at some of the others. And the last thing is, yes to that idea about doing something with the public benefit rating system. My particular water system is looking at a consolidation right now. We're looking at a potential site to move to, which is a forested site up the hill. It's great. It's going to have, more reliable water. It's going to be cleaner. It's got less exposure to potential contaminants and so on. But the owners are really concerned about what the tax implications of that might be. And, there's things out there. The Whitby Communal Land Trust, for example, has worked with, they protect an area that's the watershed for the Clinton Water District, for example. So those possibilities are out there, but I think we need many more ways of doing that, or people to be able to basically tax protect parcels that are serving as a recharge area for our groundwater.
I think a lot of what we're talking about relates to ability to extract water from various human activities and protecting property. But surface water runoff and erosion are all things that affect marine resources as well. So those are also activities that we want to be able to preserve in the future. So just want to make sure that we don't ignore those in our discussion.
I think that ties into a really good point as far as how traditionally civil engineers approach the problem of too much water, right? Is to get it out, right? That's what they're trying to do. Whereas we have this dichotomy of being a single source aquifer, we need that water in. So that affects obviously the ecology outside as well. So I think addressing that up front and making sure that all those departments are speaking to each other and policies being developed around that. The other bucket I want to throw out there that maybe we'll have time to talk about, that I think is better served for us to work on now, is water rights. I hail from a drought country in Texas and have seen the bad end of that, of it not being handled. We're in a unique time period where we can address this. All people are still pumping water. Figuring out when a well is dry, it's too late to really sort that out. What we do know in Island County, there are more claims on water rights than there are issued adjudicated water rights, which is okay when the water's flowing. But when it's not, we've got more claims outstanding. So really getting clear about how we're going to deal with this as different parts of the island, as John said, develop struggle. We're on a perch aquifer, Coltis Bay, which is going to have its own things. There's plenty of perch aquifers. We don't actually know how many. Those are going to have their own issues. But having the playbook of how we're going to address first in line, first in right, how these water rights are issued, the very arcane law, but really making that clear to users, I think is going to be really important and save us a lot of heartache in the backside.
I think we're starting to have a lot of really great and fruitful discussion that I think leads perfectly well into our next activity, where we can kind of dive a little bit deeper into these topic areas. But so we want to give everybody like 15 minutes. I have sticky notes on everybody's in front of everyone. For the audience, this is an opportunity for you as well to provide comments, list your concerns. But what we're really looking for is write as many sticky notes as possible. Please have one topic per sticky note, because we're going to collect all those sticky notes from you and sort them and organize them. But what we're looking for is what concerns you most pertaining to changing precipitation. So what are your concerns? And what should be top priority in establishing goals and policies for the climate element? So ultimately, we want to take these concerns and we want to take them and turn them into goals and policies. Like, what should we do to address these concerns? And what's going to be helpful to include in the comprehensive plan. So I will give 15 minutes, write as many sticky notes as possible pertaining to changing precipitation. We're going to collect those and organize them, and that will work with our next discussion. So. All right. Everybody for providing your sticky notes. I think we will gather to start our discussion. If everyone would like to take their seats.
Yeah.
I think somebody.
Also, I hear that maybe we're having some trouble hearing in the back. If there is a challenge, I'm going to try and speak very loudly and encourage the rest of our panel to speak loudly as well. But also, I'm encouraging everyone more than welcome to move your seats, to come closer, to move a chair closer to the table so you can hear a little better. But unfortunately, we don't have a microphone today. Just
You're welcome to bring your chair around the side here.
Yeah.
Get a little closer if you're having a hard time hearing. That's fine.
I'll give everyone a minute to move. But just thank you everybody for your comments.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah.
This is good. This will help everyone to hear a little bit better. Okay, awesome. So we've taken everybody's feedback, and I'm hoping to address, there's a lot of common themes in the feedback we've received. We'll definitely be taking all of this input and logging it, so we have it to reference and use while we develop goals and policies, but hoping to just facilitate a good discussion on each of the topic areas that we have identified as throughout collecting feedback. So as you'll see on the wall, you may or may not be able to see that far. We have quite a few different topic areas, with water management and aquifer recharge as being the kind of top priority and top concern. So we are going to start our discussion on aquifer recharge and sort of pick up on some of the comments that were made earlier after the initial presentation. So I think one of the main things I see here is the need for data and information that help us to understand actually what like the relationship between recharge as well as water availability and how that fluctuates and changes over time. There's a lot of information here on low impact development that helps the ground to recharge. Any other comments and concerns we would make?
Yeah, I would just say that when it comes to questions about recharge, it's really about how does our land use trend and our recharge trend connect. And so if we see a trend of, for instance, deforestation and topsoil loss, then how can we extrapolate what that means for our recharge capacity? And then how can we make land use decisions and taxation decisions and incentive programs that basically maximize the likelihood that trends that are harming aquifer recharge capacity get reversed?
Definitely. So I'm hearing ensuring that our codes for how we develop are not making this problem worse, right? I will start with Harry, because we made eye contact first, and I'll go around.
One element of recharge I didn't write down, but I'm sure was brought up earlier, and that is the time lag between rainfall and drinking water. Decades, perhaps. In some places, perched aquifers are maybe months. So that by the time the rain gets to the aquifer, it may be at the end of our comprehensive plan. So we need to act now to understand that process.
Yeah.
Extraction's easy, it's today. But recharge is way different.
Yeah, the timeline's important there.
Yeah, one of the things that we're lacking from a data perspective is an idea of where, for a particular well, our water is coming from. There's a thing called a wellhead protection area. There's a map on the Department of Health website called the SWAT map, which shows these areas around each well. And by default, each well is assigned a circle. And those circles are just a default setting. They are not accurate. They're not meant to be. very few water systems have actually ever done a wellhead protection area delineation. Actually, I can count them, it's one and it's mine. And, but right now, the state actually has grants to do that, but the grants are to the individual water systems. But it would be great if we could kind of organize that information, pick some certain water systems, so we could develop a model. I've talked to Chris about this, develop a bit more of a model about where the water is coming from and going to, which would help a lot with these kinds of questions of what we need to protect and where do we need to put these, enhanced recharge, where do we need to protect recharge areas.
Yeah, the integration of these separate systems and how they play in
Yeah.
sharing space.
One of the things that tends to happen, I think we mentioned in the last session, particularly in this county, is that it can be a little insular and where the data is being, these problems we're talking about could be handed to the county hydrologist, which is the wrong place for the, certainly needs to be involved, but we've got great groups like the UW climate groups. We've got these great research bodies that we should be directly working with rather than trying to come up with our own little model and reinventing the wheel and inputting data. Let's lean on these high power models and high power analysis that we have. And one case in point is that I think in the next session we're talking about heat. There's an equation, it's the Monmouth equation that says that for every 1 degree we increase, we should expect evapotranspiration to go up around 7%. So now we've got, not only do we have less water falling in this period of time, but we have more of it evaporating more quickly and not going into the ground. None of this is being modeled in any of our stuff right now. So there should be not an alarm, but a pretty big red flag that we're making decisions with really big gaps of information, and that could be extremely consequential, and would happen fairly abruptly when they start to happen, when we start to see them. So I think what we're all saying is let's not wait for that, and that requires a lot of inertia and a lot of momentum up front to not fall into that trap.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also just wanted to point out the equity considerations of protecting our drinking water, because only some members of our community can own acreage, only some members of our community can invest in infrastructure, only some members of our community can clear cut a forest, but all members of our community drink water. And if we find land use policies that incentivize people who, for instance, own timberland by giving them a bigger tax break so that the forest stands instead of is harvested as timber, we shouldn't necessarily think that it's an incentive only for that landowner. It's also an incentive for all the community members to benefit from the life-providing services of that land. And we should just carefully analyze our taxation and our incentivization and look for opportunities to make privately owned land into a public benefit, and really reimagine what public benefit of privately held land means. It doesn't always mean walking trails or beautiful views. It can mean protecting the elements of life.
Absolutely, and that was a topic that came up in the last session as well, just reassessing the way we evaluate and distribute incentives and ensuring that we are, like, community benefit is something we can loosely measure. We don't want to assign too many numbers to it, but that needs to be here. Any other comments on aquifer recharge? No? All right.
Yeah, comment taxation raises that policy line doesn't support what you're suggesting. And that's a big policy issue, that if land goes into PBRS, then everybody else's tax bill covers it, including the people who can't afford to have their taxes increased. So one big policy issue is tax adjust for PBRs. It's called tax cost.
That's what I'm asking for with the PBRS reform in 2025, is to really be holistic in thinking through how to make the maximum benefit for the most citizens.
It's also, that brings up a good perspective. It's a good point. It's estimated that approximately about 10% of our property taxes go into the DFL program, which is built really around clear cuts and harvesting timber. If we're investing 10% in that, I'm not making an argument for or against, I'm just saying all of PBRS falls into less than 1%. So it's really important to keep that perspective, because I keep hearing some at the commission level frame these public benefit systems as some sort of tax, a huge tax burden. I think we need to look at it as a whole and really look at simultaneously measuring what costs are averted by investing in natural infrastructure. So if by investing in natural infrastructure, we reduce the need for putting more conduits and more ditches because we're slowing the water down and sinking it, that needs to be accounted for in our overall cost to the citizens. So I think it's an important discussion. I agree with you.
That leads really well into our next topic, which is water management. So a few of the comments here are referencing stormwater and natural systems and how do we slow the flow and make sure that water is sinking into the aquifer, as well as making sure that we are having systems that manage this increase in extreme precipitation well and have policies that are of low impact and make sure that water isn't flowing too fast and out. Any comments on water management?
I have a couple comments. One being, one thing we need to do is recharge the aquifer, but another thing we need to do is consider where water flows into natural and vegetated areas. And, not every drop of water makes it into the aquifer, but theoretically, every drop of water has the chance of making it into something, a food cycle or a forest. So I would say, in addition to talking about planning for aquifer recharge, we should also talk about planning for hydration of our natural systems and areas. And then I also see a number of comments related to the concept of a public utility district.
Yes.
And I would just love for there to be some discussion around what a public water district would mean for Island County and where it's worked in other jurisdictions. And, as for instance, personally, as a homeowner in Sketchum Head, we've had multiple weeks of water system failure during breaks and repairs in the aging infrastructure. And I just wonder how much more we're going to start seeing of that in coming decades.
Great comment.
This goes back to John's comment, and that is, we need to look at this on a micro watershed issue. We don't have thousands of acres of watershed. We have small little ridges up and down the island, and there's a center island there, which is pretty much flat. So I support that at the watershed level.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm interested in speaking more to that PUD issue, public utility district. Is now a good time?
Yes, absolutely.
Let me dive in. So here's the problem. We got a lot of water systems on the island that are getting older. We're getting a lot of water system board members who are getting older. The age of both is up around 70. And a lot of them need repair. We are reliant on, for the most part, to talk about here, the Group A water systems by and large are reliant on entities called satellite management agencies to run these water systems on a day-to-day basis. We are down to functionally two in most of the island. There's a third one that does some. Of those two, one may retire at some point soon. We're not sure what will happen then. The other one has been purchased by a Fortune 500 gas pipeline company with head office in Portland and shareholders and banks in New York and Wall Street and all the rest of it, who also happen to own the island's largest for-profit water system company. We're perilously close to having a critical amount of our water management infrastructure management in the hands of one corporation that frankly is not that interested in that quality. That's not their mission in life. Their mission in life is to get a return on investment for their shareholders, which is fine. That's the business they're in. We need an alternative to that. We are satellite management agencies around the state. The whole system is broken statewide. It's not unique to Island County. Satellite management agencies around the state have gone broke. They've gone belly up. It's happened in Mason, Pierce, Lewis counties, which is how come Thurston County Public Utility District operates water systems in 3 other counties because they don't have any. And it's come to the attention of the Department of Health. It's come to the attention of the director of the Department of Health twice from me, and it's really a legislative problem, and it's not a legislative priority. We can do something about it at the county level, and at the county level, that would be start a public utility district. And it's hard to do that without support from our county commissioners. We need to figure out a way to build that in. It's looking forward. It's hard to foresee a future safe drinking water in this county unless we do that. And it might be two. We might give Camino Island to Snohomish Public Utility District, like we do conservation districts, and have a different one with the island. But it's something that we need. And I'm hoping there's a place for that in the comprehensive plan. If not, there certainly will be in the coordinated water system plan. But more places, more often the better.
So the need for a public utility district. Anybody else want to provide comment, feedback on that?
Well, I just make an observation. Years ago, our family had a piece of property on Guaymas Island. It's a private water system with about 40 hookups and charged $10 a year for water. And the well failed. And, the Skagit PUD came in and did a demonstration system, reverse osmosis system. I don't know how practical it was. Rates went way up, but at least there was an entity, that public utility, stepped in and essentially assured continued water for that group of homes in an environment similar to
I mean, it's something that makes sense. I would, on behalf of farmers, throw in a cautionary note that there would need to be special carve-outs and provisions for farms. And I'm assuming this is primarily focused on dense residential areas, which is fine. But you know, as long as it's not a one-size-fits-all for situation.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add a precautionary note that's already been echoed in many of the comments. It's happening now. And once it begins to happen, the potential for cascading events and growing impact becomes even more likely.
Yeah, just to add to that, our water management systems and our water infrastructure on the island are already heavily stressed, mostly just through age and condition. Everything that we're talking about today is just adding to that and making it even more urgent than it already was. But as Barbara says, we need these things now, never mind soon.
And it brings up the point that meanwhile, a stream of well permits are going out the door every day at the state level. And there's little to no coordination between state approval of a permit and what's going on in our own aquifer.
It's
And that's a little bit hyperbole, but it's also just something that we need to really maximize coordination and communication on. And I know that our state representatives are open to that too, but we have to guide the conversation. We want it to go.
So
Yeah.
why is that?
going back to the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act in the early 1970s. The Safe Drinking Water Act decided that they would exclude what they called private wells at the time, and what EPA calls private wells is anything under 15 connections. They decided to exclude that. Washington State, in its infinite wisdom, Department of Ecology decided that if it was 6 or less, you didn't even need a water rate. You were permit exempt. What that's had the effect of doing is actually incentivizing private wells and small water systems to the point that in Island County, we now have 9,000 wells. We have more Group A water systems in Island County than the whole state of Iowa. We have a well for every 7 people on drinking water, on groundwater in Island County. And that's fairly common across the state. It's become unsustainable to manage. And as a result, we're seeing these cracks forming in the system. But we keep on doing it. And, I'm working to try to consolidate some water systems. It's like shoveling the driveway while it's still snowing. Or for those who can relate, like cleaning the house while you have a teenager living in. I mean, it's it's coming down as fast as we can clean it up. And
We need a moratorium then on wells somehow?
I'm glad you said that word. It needs to be out there in the discussion. I mean,
Skagit has it,
a
Stalin has it.
lot of communities that are in this situation are very much a discussion. Let's figure this out before we start issuing.
Skagit and Snohomish have in-stream flow rules, which kind of force their hand on that one. I don't know about a moratorium, but what we have basically is we have things coming down from the state. We have Commerce telling you need to do this for rapid growth sustainably. You need to encourage people to go into urban areas. And then we have ecology pushing down policies that are telling people to do the exact opposite. And that's a major disconnect at that level. You have ecology basically working against what both Commerce and Department of Health are telling you.
And I don't think anybody's being malicious, but it's
just
large
responsible.
bureaucratic agencies with different tasks. And at the county level, it comes down to the important work that Emily and her group is doing on the backside of this is looking at zoning. Whether we like it or not, the vast majority of our development has occurred in rural areas despite the Growth Management Act and stuff. And so that's leading to more wells. So whatever we need to do, whether it's a carrot or a stick, we've got to start enforcing that, what we want to happen to actually happen, because it's not. And I've got wells being drilled on both sides of me. And I'm watching one of our well levels go down as they're drilled. And that's an uncomfortable feeling for a farmer. So it's just, I think that's a really critical issue because we could think we solved the problem, but meanwhile permits are just
Right.
going out
Mm-hmm.
through a totally separate process. So that's, I'm glad that came up.
I see there's a couple people in the audience who have comments or questions, so.
I just want to comment, one, you don't have to have just one PUD on Whidbey Island. You can have multiple. And secondly, the idea of moratorium could encourage others to move toward consolidation. So you could get some support from a moratorium for more PUDs, for a PUD and so forth. So it's not a bad thing.
Has there been any discussion about rainwater capture systems?
That was also something that's listed here, so, let's talk about rainwater capture systems.
I think I put that one up there. I think especially as we're looking at ways to spread out, which is going to be a more acute deluge of water that comes in a shorter period of time, we've got to make work for a longer period of time in the summer. There can be scenarios where incentivizing rainwater catchment, particularly there's some really good residential programs that for lawn watering and that type of thing, that the barrels are at a discounted rate. There's a lot of small type things, but we could also incentivize it at a larger scale for agriculture and capturing in cisterns and that type of thing. And really the vessels that hold the water are most of the expenses. So that's a place to focus the incentives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating idea, and I think added a posted about incentivizing acquisition and construction of catchment systems. I also think that it might dovetail well with having some kind of incentives for new construction to include gray water bypass,
Yeah.
so that non-black water discharge is going into landscaping as opposed to into the septic system. And I feel like between giving people bulk buying power for the components for catchment, and then giving developers and homeowners an incentive to create a gray water bypass. And maybe working with the Department of Health to really define what safe gray water reuse looks like. Because I think right now, everything that goes down the drain is villainized and treated as sewage, but, you know, a lot of, like, our laundry discharge could very happily water our ornamental gardens, but we just don't deal with that very well as a society.
And we're decades behind on that in this county. Right now, we should, especially in rural areas, have a gray water option, and we do. And on farms, that's insane. We could be keeping a lot of nutrient-rich water on site and decreasing the need to pull more water by simply replicating what the counties around us are doing. We don't even have to invent anything new.
Yeah, there's some great examples out there for anybody who wants to do a field trip. Lopez Community Land Trust is an amazing community that runs on recycled rainwater. You know, they use it for flushing toilets, all kinds of stuff, and then goes to a pond, and then they use that for the gray water goes to a pond, they use that for irrigation. Right here on the island, there's one of the farms on the prairie repurposed what used to be a manure lagoon from back in the day when it was a cow farm, and they use that now for capturing rainwater off the roof and use that for supplementing irrigation during the summer. And certainly where we're going to have these longer dry periods, you know, things like that start making an awful lot of sense.
And Carrie, I think, had a comment, and then
I've heard that Snohomish County has a prohibition against a certain number of gallons that you can collect off your roof. Is that true, or is that anything like that in Otter County?
There's
Can
no
you collect all you can
prohibition
get?
to collect rainwater. That ecology put that forth when Seattle wanted to capture rainwater in some of the high-rise buildings. So actually, I was part of the team took into ecology and said we got to let people capture because of the first and right water law. It did prohibit some.
Can you speak up a little bit?
It did prohibit some folks from capturing large volumes of rainwater. You can imagine a building downtown would have a lot of rainwater. So that actually has been lifted. So unless you're on the upstream and you have a water right, then you have to talk to ecology. But most here on Island County, you wouldn't have that problem because you're not an upstream water right. So, but there is no prohibition against collection.
Good. The ecology does require a permit, except they've issued a general permit for rainwater collection.
Yep.
And across the state.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can do it. It's a general permit.
I'm just at the beginning of all this, but I haven't heard any talk about my sources of water. Last I paid attention was the Navy gets their water across the bridge somehow, was maybe wrong. But is there any potential for getting, how many off-grid sources do we have? And if so, if not, is there any potential for getting off-grid sources?
So, the Navy and the city of Oak Harbor get their water from the Skagit River, and that water is processed at the Anacortes Water Treatment Plant. At this time, we're not expecting to expand that water, as you're not supposed to expand municipal, which is the city's water lines, outside of the urban growth area. So at this time, the water will not be expanded into rural Island. It's not part of the plan.
To answer your question, for the rest of us, that are part of this sole source aquifer, there is no plan B.
Should there be a plan B? Can there be a plan B?
The drought that affects the county also affects Skagit River. And it's a limited.
Our plan B is managing the aquifer. Yeah. And C and D and E, yeah.
I will take this comment, but I do want to remind everybody that we will have an opening in the last 30 minutes for the rest of the audience for further discussion, just so we can get through the rest of these topics that we have. But do you have a comment that you'd like to?
Well, I was just going to say the Anacortes, the water project, that's from the schedule. It's up to 9, I think, the contract is for $900 million
gallons a year, maximum. But the future with the Skagit River and ESA issues and tribal issues, the contract for Oak Harbor is only to 2037 or 35, something like that. Another 10 years. That contract could be avoided and not renewed if there's issues and water shortages from the Skagit River. And that's, so where's their water gonna come if that is not renewed, the contract? And how is that gonna impact this island in the future? Is that accounted for in the comprehensive plan?
It's accounted for in Oak Harbor's comprehensive plan.
But not the county?
Because we don't plan for the city's water.
Okay.
We have to plan for aquifer. So whether you're city, county, or district, it's all the same sole source aquifer. That's what a lot of people are climbing for. Let's look at, not you all independent, whether it's a well or whether it's a city. Let's look at the whole county. It is a sole source aquifer.
Right, if we talk about Plan A and Plan B, Plan A, the working plan right now is City of Oak Harbor takes water from the Skagit River and the rest of us take water from the sole source aquifer. A very highly likely Plan B is that contract gets voided and suddenly we're faced with the City of Oak Harbor drawing from the aquifer too. And the city may need to address aging infrastructure and contaminated wells and all the other challenges that come with that. But the county should be eyeing what are the recharge inputs to support us in the inevitable case that Oak Harbor joins in drawing from this aquifer.
For the sake of time, I'm gonna move to our next topic, which is economic. So a lot of the comments that are listed here pertain to ensuring that we have enough funding to support people who are negatively impacted by these impending hazards, as well as the tax implications of some of these changes and what that means for tax base and who might be more disadvantaged in that situation. Any economic comments?
Yeah, let me jump right in there. Just to say this, that at the moment, the State Office of Drinking Water has money burning a hole in its pocket. They're having a hard time spending it. This is bipartisan infrastructure law money. That's the good news. The less good news is that by and large, that goes out to individual water systems who need to feel the urgency to actually go ahead and work on some projects and attract that funding. And there's a tremendous amount that we could and should be doing right now. To what extent we can try to direct that countywide, I'm not sure. But yeah, we all, a lot of people need some help there in accessing that funding that's already there. And like I said, the problem with so much stuff that comes out of the Department of Health is it is on a water system by water system basis. And yeah, it's messy, complicated, and granular. But that's our water situation. It's messy, complicated, and granular. So, yeah, to what extent that fits in with the plan, I'm not sure. Maybe we can put something in there. It's also not clear how long this stuff's going to last. I mean, by the time the comprehensive plan is done and written, it may have turned into a pumpkin. We don't know. Hopefully not. But assuming that there's still funding available, some guidance and strategy on prioritizing projects and accessing that funding could help a tremendous amount with the economic side of dealing with this. There's money out there. We just need to build a pathway between the money that's there and where it's needed to fulfill our planning goals.
Awesome. I would also just add that there's an overarching need to have data about the economic impact of land use decisions. Because I feel like we operate from these assumptions that development is good for the economy and that ecosystems are implicitly but not explicitly valuable. And so there are just some sort of, I don't know, false assumptions that Western culture seems to operate from that can be challenged by a look at the real economic impact of conservation versus other approaches. And so when it comes to something like the PBRS taxation offset, the easiest or most obvious answer is if you cut taxes here, you have to raise them there. But the more complicated answer is if you don't preserve this forest as an aquifer recharge area, the cost of substituting that capacity in some other way gets borne by the people. And so I just think that it would be really wise for Island County to invest in an independent economic analysis of ecosystem services and to base some of our planning decisions on what we learned from that study.
Absolutely. This is the topic that was brought up last time as well. Just like how do we place value on our ecosystem services?
So I'm really struggling how to provide feedback individually broken into these various topics. So I work with a lot of folks through the Whidbey Island Water Systems Association. Right now aren't really aware that they should be saving money for the infrastructure that they have to be replaced. Working with people who aren't sure the impacts of the water quality that it has on their health. They're very upset about rate increases. But really, what's the cost of water? So providing what we have now isn't sustainable. So we're operating from a place right now, we're already failing. And us in the room are seeing the impacts of what this climate is going to add to it. But we've got a lot of already very big issues that are swept under the rug, that are not coordinated very well. We brought up the topic of working in silos and different agencies doing different things. And so I'm having a hard time honing it down into establishing goals and policies for the climate element when we're starting from a basis that's really far behind. What we're doing is not sustainable, and really the pressure of the climate change isn't. The pressure should have already been on before even thinking about adding this. So I don't know how to get people to be involved in what's already serving them. And so I think that would be one of the big issues is, what does water really cost? You're drinking water that comes from the ground and not giving it a second thought. And there's very few of us trying to raise the red flags and say, this is really a big problem. And there's a lot of people that understand the problem and they're trying to grapple with it, but there's no clear direction from above, and there's no clear pathway forward for them if they wanted to do something. So me here, thinking about how to take the next step with 20 years of utility experience under my belt, struggling with the next step, thinking about the 80-year-old who's running his community water system that's just tired and doesn't want to go flip the switch to turn to pump on with no one to call. So I'm not sure where we go from here, but the first step is I don't know, maybe public education about the existing condition, because it's not good, and this is not going to help. the climate element, the climate impacts that are coming down the pipe, it's pretty,
That's already bad.
it's already bad.
I think a lot of these economic issues we're talking about here kind of relate to what people might have to pay for water and what something might cost or not. But big picture, if you look at growth in the economy, availability of water could be a significant constraint. So I think we just remember the broad economic context of what we have to do to grow and support the services of businesses and residents.
Absolutely. I think, especially in developing the comprehensive plan and these goals and policies, one thing that we really want to focus on and get feedback on is like, who are the overburdened populations who are already burdened by a system that's maybe not working as well or not sustainable already, that may be exacerbated by potential climate impacts, and how can we develop education programs or get the money that we need to make sure that the rates don't go up too high for people who are already burdened.
Currently, because there are so many private wells, ours being one of them, we have to incur all those costs directly, and that includes testing, which is insanely expensive to do good tests. So some sort of, well, I would even call it, I was going to say subsidy, but incentive to also get the data back into the pool. Because right now we're flying blind with all these private wells. Most of them are not metered. We don't even know how much is coming in. And people don't realize that. They think someone's managing it somewhere. No, these are all happening without meters on them. So I mean, let's start with that. And then, but rather than, bring a hammer down, I think we start incentivizing, hey, listen, we'll cover your annual water analysis to make sure you're getting healthy, clean water for your daughters. In return, you give us these reports of data, usage or whatever it is, but we could do a win-win kind of scenario.
Absolutely. John?
I just want to, we're actually writing what's called a resiliency sub-element of the climate element. So just think, if you don't, resiliency is your ability to recover from disaster. So it's saying, what's your plan A, what's your plan B? I just wanted to point out that doesn't mean we only have to look at climate change. So that's why we look at your current management plan, we look at other things. So keep that in mind as we're talking. What I'm hearing is resiliency is low right now on the water side. So just so you know that we're not just thinking about 20 years down the road, you can't think about it.
It should be, what's going to happen to your report?
What's going to happen to it?
Yeah.
I give it to Emily.
What's going to happen to their report?
It's part of the comprehensive plan, so it's going to be adopted with the rest of the comprehensive plan.
So we can look at something in 2045?
Well, oh, you mean?
No.
Where are you
We
gonna
need
see?
to have that.
Yeah.
We already have a failing system.
No, I hear you. So the plan he's developing, you're gonna see drafts this year as we develop the elements, and you're gonna be able to comment on the goals and policies that come out of this conversation. There's gonna be multiple opportunities to get input throughout 2025 before the county commissioners adopt it at the end of the year. Sorry, where it can then live.
And we should add that John's not only just drafting this new resiliency sub-element, we're looking at our land use policies, our natural resources, and the rest of our comprehensive plan to see how these resiliency goals and policies can be really instilled and drilled into the remainder of our goals and policies to be implemented.
I'll start this comment by complimenting this team because it is not an easy job they've been doing, and they've been doing an outstanding job, in my opinion. That said, they can't control what gets implemented out of the comprehensive plan. When people hear it passes, some people think that everything's getting implemented. That is not the case. It simply means we're putting out this as a mission statement, as a goal, what we want to do. It's still up to these commissioners to actually implement the things, which they still haven't implemented a lot of the stuff from the 2016 plan. So it's important to put that into context, that what might come across as a solution is a suggestion for a solution that may or may not be implemented by the county commissioners if they care to implement it. So I think that's.
Yeah.
We can try as a community and through non-governmental organizations and individuals, we can try to hold the county more accountable in the sense that there are legal repercussions for failure to comply with GMA, which requires a synchronicity between the comprehensive plan and the codes and ordinances. But it's really, really expensive and hard and time consuming and energy consuming to try to drag the county through the courtroom every time we want to see them comply with the law. So I am really hopeful that things can get better.
We talked about it last week, or at our last meeting too. It's like, it's the culture shift within an organization to work together to move things forward. So getting buy-in early in the process. Again, I'm gonna ask, is there anybody from Public Works here today? So that's your team that implements projects. They're the ones that get funding to do projects. So there needs to be cohesion between all departments from the top to the bottom to get that buy-in to move these things forward.
And just to clarify, we do have a monthly meeting of all our internal departments on this climate element. So they participate in those monthly meetings. This is they have staff time to commit to coming to these meetings and, everybody. So.
I just want to plus one Jake's comment about private well owners. The home that I own is in Skagit Head in a group water system. The home where I live is on a private well. And I was really surprised when I learned that testing would be at our discretion and on our dime. And when I called public health to talk to them about water flavor and discoloration issues, they gave me some helpful advice, but there's no kind of public program for me to get my water tested. And I just think it's a wonderful potential incentivization for somebody in my scenario to say, the county can help make sure that my water is safe to drink if I can help by providing the data about how much I'm withdrawing and what's in that water.
These are all really.
I know you're wanting to move, and I think this will weave into another one. So
Yeah.
I'll help you move with this comment.
Well, next is incentives, but actually we've covered all of these topics. There's been a few recommendations for incentives which have been already addressed, which is great.
My comment was about we've been in a state designated emergency drought declaration for the past 3 consecutive years. Yet we have no county trigger of policy reaction, no response whatsoever to that declaration. If that was a declaration for a hurricane or any other emergency declaration, we would have some reaction to it. But here it's just business as usual. Oh, we're in a drought again this year, but we're not. We're in a declared drought zone, but we're not going to adapt or modify any of our actions. And I think that's a problem. If we need an excuse to develop a county plan of action, let it be triggered by the state declaration of emergency drought. So they've given us this thing that says you are now in an emergency situation. Let's take it like an emergency and plan around it. We're not. It's a problem.
I think that's a great comment, and I think especially speaking of that, the next topic is habitat. Although your comment also goes in the water. As we kind of go through some of these next topics, a lot of what's kind of here is starting to have already been covered. So I'm just going to sort of like loosely introduce the topics and then we can just continue on with the discussion. But in this specific heading, we have a lot of information about ecosystem services, as well as biodiversity, plant species, and how we can create a supportive environment for some of those natural systems that exist and how they may be impacted or impact some of these impending changes. Let's move this.
Can I make just a comment? I'm actually a wildlife biologist. posing as a visitor. I've been monitoring great blue heron colonies in Puget Sound region for the past 30 years. And I attempted an update in 2020 and found that there are no existing, all the heron colonies that were existing in the state database on Whidbey Island. And I have no data for Whidbey Island. I know there's herons here. We don't know where they're nesting, where they're breeding. If you have any information about that, please let me know. But the other thing is the concept of island biogeography and how that affects how you manage and study an island, and the limitations, the limits in carrying capacity, looking at all that's necessary for biological life, and looking at carrying capacity from the perspective of biodiversity as well. When I look at the herons, they're such a common species, everybody recognizes them, but what they don't realize is that even the most common species can be greatly affected by change, both climate change, but also development, loss of habitat, loss of nesting substrate, loss of prey species, reduction in eelgrass areas that they depend on during the breeding season, and loss of freshwater wetlands, which they also depend on. So these are all concepts that can be folded into the human system as well, and looking at limits to growth, limits in carrying capacity, and really putting that front and center when you're looking at economics, incentives, water quality, all of these things. It all ties into we don't have endless capacity. There are limits, and changes are afoot, they're occurring, and we definitely need the data in order to base decisions. It needs to be science-based. So, thank you.
Can I riff off her comment and add a thought that if it doesn't already exist, some sort of feedback loop to citizen scientists or scientists into county DNR so that there could be overlay mapping of nesting habitats and that type of thing. In a world of GIS, that information is not that difficult to put into the hands of planners and others, and it's just a matter of opening that. Would that be something that you would be interested in inputting into? And
yeah.
how do you see the county most helpful from your perspective? What could they do?
For wildlife?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did this up in Washington County many years ago. We did a wildlife and habitat assessment countywide, where we did mapping, we did an accounting of species and the habitats that they depended on. And we looked at some of the species that have certain limitations in terms of their, well, we all have limitations. But things like heron colonies are very, that's easy to capture, it's easy to map. We've done that. But there are many other species that make Whidbey Island the unique place that it is. Things like California quail, completely overlooked, completely taken for granted, and they are incredibly sensitive to habitat alterations because they depend on shrub layer, they depend on connectivity across the landscape, and with increased development, we're losing connectivity. We lose our stream systems, our wetland systems, and all of those things need to be accounted for. It's an accounting as well as a mapping.
Yeah, that is very exciting for me to hear because I feel like as we think about the way that climate change will impact developed areas and human habitation, it's going to have an equally large impact on the natural systems. And what are the coastal wetlands of the future? What are the new marine areas, the new tidal lagoons and estuaries going to be? And then what are our current and projected habitat zones, and what are the stressors that are going to be on those habitat areas in the conditions of more intense and less frequent precipitation? And when I think about how Island County seems to have sort of a short institutional memory about certain things affecting wildlife. For instance, we see applications for building in areas where neighbors have had biological site assessments showing the presence of threatened species. And the current, just in this year, some permits have been issued to build homes on properties adjoining western toad habitat. The western toad as a threatened species has already been protected in the court system. And it would really serve the county well to have a map of sites with documented evidence of western toad presence. But there seems to be a gap in translation between what an independent biological site assessment consultant produces and what makes it into the map that a planner can pull up when they're thinking about whether there are questions that need to be addressed before a building permit is issued. So creating some kind of continuity in record keeping and reporting and internal tracking of critical wildlife health indicators would be a really great climate resilience step.
The Marine Resources Committee collects data on several things, do a regular bulk health inventory, and try to keep track of eelgrass as well, and constant source of fresh water and source of sediment is critical for both of those. The extremes from changes in weather events really aren't good for either of those. But again, that is a source of data that we are collecting. We can get it in a database, relate that to some of these water conditions. We're starting to be able to identify some relationships in the future.
That's awesome. Greg, do you know if any of that information is making it into a county overlay of any kind? I think that's what we're realizing, is there's a gap between all this awesome data collection and information and when a planner pulls up a map and is assessing the development plan.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how formally that information has been shared. Follow that, whether maybe you can answer.
Okay. Actually, 7 counties in the MRC network in the northern part of Puget Sound are tracking bulk health and have tracked eelgrass. And the reports have been sent to various state departments, DNR, and I'm looking to Kelly, who may not be gone. So yes, we'll try to account for the full circle, the life cycle of this research, and provide you information.
Well, and I would turn that into a comment to make sure that the county is doing their part to get this data into a format that's usable and relevant. So it's on, if these pockets of data exist, then we should be making the effort to
Being
incorporate
the
them.
centralized place that gathers all of the information.
If I may just add to the comments that Greg just made, this comes full circle. There is an assumption that development will happen and that air and water and productive land will constantly provide even under these developmental changes. The question of shoreline arbor has a great deal to do with research, eelgrass, salmon, various other species that are important. And all I can say is that in a generalized view, you need to let the islands dictate the capacity that they have. We're operating on the assumption that we have time and we have the option of using these systems and still relying on them.
Yes.
And I think we've come to a critical point where the habits of development are now running into the limits of capacity. And this is a lovely opportunity to begin to build that and to defer to these natural systems. The other piece of that is that these systems provide buffers for resilience. If we were to look at flood-prone areas, let them become flood-prone because we can't build a wall to hold them back. And use those systems, those places as places for recreation, places for habitat restoration for various species. We've gained the benefits of water that's recharged and all these other systems. So we've actually gone full circle in this discussion, and we're back to policy issues that require that these systems work in order for us to.
It ties into.
Yeah, I just want to bring the conversation back to groundwater. We talked about wetlands. Wetlands interact with groundwater. We regulate them differently. Those regulations go back 50 years. Maybe we had a different understanding. We've begun to understand the relationship between in-stream flow in rivers and streams and groundwater, but there's just as much between wetlands and groundwater. We have very good, by and large, wetland delineation in Island County. There's very good mapping from several different sources. What we don't have is an understanding of how those wetlands are interacting with the groundwater. Some of those wetlands are acting as recharge areas for groundwater. Some of them are actually it's the other way around. They're spring fed by springs that are coming from groundwater that's landed elsewhere. So as we proceed with, I hope, taking a look at what our groundwater flows look like, it would be great to integrate that with some of the wetland mapping and delineation that we already have to get a better understanding. Because if we make higher demands on our groundwater, that in turn is going to have impacts on those wetlands that are going to directly affect habitat. And we need to be aware of that going forward, and be aware of what those trade-offs are going to look like, what we might lose when we gain in other areas.
I don't think it's come up yet, but it should be noted that we are, as a county, sorely lacking in dedicated monitoring wells. You look at Bainbridge, if you look at other counties, if you look at San Juan County, they've invested in proper monitoring wells. We have a geohydrologist here that can tell you why it matters that it's a dedicated monitoring well and not just data being taken from a residential well. It does matter. Our current hydrologist may not know that, but it does. And so we need a monitoring system that can take us into the future with real data and that's an investment. I think there's federal resources and grants that we could be moving into as a single source aquifer. So that would tie into sort of the economic thing, is that around all of this stuff, we should have a dedicated county grant writer that's focused on grabbing this money, because other counties are getting this money before we do. And it requires an allocation, and these guys are busy enough to have to do that too. So having an FTE dedicated to grabbing this funds, we missed a lot of them that came down in the infrastructure package, could be worth its weight in gold to pay for a lot of these changes.
Absolutely. All right. Just to sort of tie the groundwater question to this question of shoreline armoring that came up, the more we fight to keep our let's say our least sustainable developed areas as developed, the more we risk a lot of potential challenges, including plummeting biodiversity of the nearshore marine environment and increased erosion of bluffs and adjoining areas, and increased saltwater intrusion into wells that are on the lowest lying parts of our islands. So I just think that as we address this climate sub-element in 3 stages, it's important to notice the places where each of the 3 connect. And I think that whether we need to acknowledge the untenable nature of some past human decisions in today's circumstances is one of those questions that threads through all three.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really want to add one thing to that. That was great. This nexus, it sounds like a stretch, but this nexus of sea level rise and the impacts that's having in certain areas and our groundwater conversation is real. I'm working on, like I said, trying to get some water systems consolidate. Half of my water system is on a beach, and these people, 2/3 of them aren't there. They're just investment properties. The third that are there, the average age is about 70. They're looking at how badly they want to invest in a water system that's going to last the next 50 years when their house is going to last maybe 10, maybe 20, and that's maybe as long as they're going to last. And it's really hard to tell these people this is something we should do. This is a responsibility we have to the next generation. Yeah, they get it, but nobody can give them any assurance of what's going to happen to their house. We've got no plan for that. Trying to make a water system plan when we have no plan for leaving the shoreline property is a really hard thing to do. So these things really do all fit together. You can't fix one without fixing it. You've got to give people some kind of security and future and an idea of what direction we're going in so that we can work with them to get done the things that we need to do. Yeah, totally.
I do want to get to one more topic. Wildfire. Maybe we could save wildfire for the next one. I think we have an add one, but I'm pretty sure those are probably covered unless there are any additional comments.
I would just highlight, it does weave through all of them, but I would just highlight, obviously farms use a lot of water. It goes back into the ground, most of it. It's growing food. So any policy decisions we need to really have conversations with include our agricultural sector. And it often, the flip side of that is that when water problems happen, farms often get targeted first. And we need to preemptively prevent that from occurring because it's the wrong place to put the emphasis. Well, your food security, now you're jeopardizing your food security to solve this other problem. So, but when wells start running dry, and if they do, is the wrong time to solve these problems because you think we have contentious discussions now, visit those. So 2 points that I wanted to emphasize that came up that are tied to these. One is the economic analysis of natural infrastructure and ecosystem services. I think it's come up time and time. That makes it a much easier policy discussion for a lot of folks. A lot of us are into it for the virtues themselves, but there's plenty of models that allow us to do that. Second is something that I think that has come up is that newcomers that want to enter in with resources should be prepared to burden that cost burden should be shifted, and I think that most would agree to that scenario, rather than absorbing decisions to move into areas that are more sensitive. Yeah. That shifting that cost burden to those choosing to develop in that is a rational way to do that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have about 20 to 25 minutes left, and I think this would be a great opportunity to now open up the conversation to those who are in the room.
Question. Cranberry Lake would seem to be a source of fresh water. I understand that it's spring fed. Last time the sound was intruted in the lake, talked about this and how are you going to protect the lake? And they said, well, we can't. Let us. So it occurred to me, how does policy work? You've got an important freshwater source. Mother Nature wants to change it radically. So the lake is on the south of the everything's changing. Is the policy just, hey, stuff happens? How does the policy deal with stuff
Yeah, I mean, that is an excellent question, and I think it's definitely a really challenging one to answer. Does anybody have a response?
We can reach out to the state parks agency and see if they have any comments or natural resources out of it, but at this time, since it is a state agency, we don't plan on how they protect their. Cranberry Lake is at dissection. State park, just want to make sure. So they protect that.
And I think this kind of goes into some of the comments that have been made here today, that there needs to be a lot of interdepartmental coordination, and especially at the state level as well, because Island County there's delineations even within the land of who owns what, and additionally, we're also subject to state laws as well. So I think that kind of goes into that comment of more coordination with the state level to ensure that assets such as Cranberry Lake are being well accounted for.
I was just going to suggest one, that Cranberry Lake, and like many of the other lakes on Whidbey Island, are small relative to demand. And you start taking water for other purposes, you're going to drain that lake almost very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's just pointless to even consider most of the lakes on Whidbey Island. Lone Lake is almost getting to that point of being big enough, but it's not either. But be that as it may, one of the things that I've been listening to this, and we used to sit in the room down the street here with the Island Water Resources Advisory Commission, with John and I served on that, and I think that's the only two left in the room. I'm not sure if the only two left or what. But the point of that is that there was a commission.
Yeah.
And it just simply, the county management just said, no, because we got to the point we were making recommendations about things that they didn't want to hear, frankly. Things like a coordinated water system plan, things like looking at PUDs, more consolidation, just didn't want to hear it. I urge you to bear that in mind as you go forward with your recommendations. We're already, as Randy says, we are at a point of past sustainability. We don't have an organization within the county that's going to help pull it all together and give oversight, recommendations, and judgment to how we go forward. There's nobody here to do it.
They're gonna take another run at the system plan. They're trying to consult to advise on how to put together a body to go ahead and do that. So stay tuned. It might be going.
Well, we were too.
Given how all these are intermingling, I think probably have other models that are looking at some sort of resiliency board or a resiliency commission that has a water component in it, rather than trying to piecemeal all of these impacts that are coming all at the same time, to looking at a direct line to the county. Now, obviously, you have to have commissioners that take that input and do something with it. That's a problem here sometimes. But I think that's on the heels of that. If there's independent water, that's great. But I would put forth the idea of a whatever you want to call it, some sort of resiliency citizen board or commission, advisory commission, that would have experts from various fields that provide a direct conduit of feedback and information, and a place for the public to go and interface and deliver that policy recommendations to the county commission.
Seems like more meetings like this, huh? Like an opportunity
With people
to
more
bring-
time.
Yeah,
that
more
have
people, more
Yes.
time, more repetitions to have that direct feedback. Yeah, and it's-
But it has to be an officially sanctioned
yeah,
advisory board, so that there is an outcome tied to it. Some kids.
yeah, absolutely. I really love the suggestion, and I also think that the public could use more clarity from the county commissioners about the relationship between advisory boards and policy action.
Yeah.
Because right now it feels like our advisory boards work really hard to make really smart recommendations, and 90% of those get left on the cutting room floor, if not 99%. And so having some kind of a policy as a county that recommendations of qualified advisory committees are to be instituted barring any blocking concerns or something, where a commissioner would really have to make a case for their blocking concern in order to say no to the recommendations coming out of these
Yes.
expert advisory groups. Because, you know, we see really concerning reports, for instance, the white paper from our MRC, and then, you know, county commissioners who are still sort of wringing their hands and saying, oh, but there are so many perspectives. And I would just really love there to be an expectation of action where our leadership would need to defend inaction as opposed to assuming that inaction is part of the course.
Yeah, definitely some feedback on justification for why things aren't being implemented.
As a footnote, thank you for referring to the white paper that we delivered to the commissioners from the Marine Resources Committee in December. It's very current, it's timely, it shows the relationships among all of these factors. Would it be possible for that to be circulated to the folks that have been invited to this? Emily?
We just sent out a general list about this, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good, so it's on the list.
That might also inform your work at Parametrics if you were to take a look at the MRC's white paper to understand what our local advisory committee thinks about some of these issues.
They received all the previous
Oh.
reports that were done as part of their onboarding, they received all of that.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that work, Barbara.
Just two things, a comment and question. Having a sole source aquifer designation for 40-some years, I would think that there's money available, federal money is available, at least under this administration, and that through the EPA or something, to get some monies for study. Okay, first, I don't know if anybody's even trying to do that. I don't know specifically if there is, but there must be. And that's, why would it have been designated? Second thing is, any kind of water management, you have to be able to adequately understand how things are changing, monitoring. And Jake mentioned that, but you know, the understanding the aquifer system and the changes in it, you have to have an adequate monitoring system available. And you can't use private wells. The ecology wouldn't accept that. You have resource conservation wells constructed in that manner because that gives you good data. The data you can rely on. And even though the recharge, all the modeling, everything else that could go in, it's got a high uncertainty in it because the variables are very, and these variables do math, and they're very uncertain. And so you need something to actually see what's actually happening.
Yes.
And, that takes money to put in one. The big systems, why can't they, they have 500 people or something, or connections, systems that have that kind of populace and connections, maybe they can put in for a well or two, a monitoring well or two, to understand how their system is operating and affecting the environment around them. Saltwater intrusion, everything, water level changes. You need a good monitoring system to manage, and we don't have it.
You can't manage what you don't measure.
And then getting federal monies to help monitor. I looked at the systems that we have here, and there's like 8 wells that meet the standard for ecology's, resource conservation or protection wells, and then the whole county. And that's understand the watersheds that you referred to. You need an adequate system.
Yeah.
And I don't hear anybody talking about it. Well,
We did talk about it, the resource advisory.
Yeah, it was mentioned, right.
They should have a monitoring system more widespread. And frankly, USGS will co-op with you on the use.
There's got to be federal money.
There is money
and
for
resources.
monitoring wells and monitoring stream monitoring.
This points to bringing in outside resources because our current hydrologist's response to that was, well, we'll give the property owners tape to measure the water in their well. I mean, the other counties are taking this very seriously, investing and developing systems that we can emulate. So We don't have to look far to find models to just see how they did it. How did they get it funded? I don't like reinventing the wheel. They figured it out. Bainbridge figured it out. San Juan County figured it out. We can certainly do that.
Oh, certainly.
You know, so-
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
keeping in mind that the recharge that's occurring, in a lot of places, it take a decade to reach the water table aquifer.
Right.
And that monitoring, what's happening today, won't be even monitored for 10 years, so you're seeing the effects. That's why we need to get something going now and understand the whole system, because we're running out of time.
So we've got Marnie over here, and then we'll go over here next. I just wanted to mention again how important it is that we measure what we care about. And so as part of this climate resilience sub-element, I would love to know what the county's key indicators are. I would like to know what we measure, why we measure it, and how we measure it.
Yeah.
And so things like aquifer health, discharge rates, biodiversity, contiguous habitat, forest cover, public health, economy, all these measures that we could measure. It seems like many of the reports that I see come down to tax assessed value and projected tax assessed value loss. And I just think we need to have other values, and we need to know how we measure them and how we report on their well-being. So I just hope that there's an outcome that is identifying our key indicators and then methods by which to measure those.
Yeah, and I think in both of our meetings, and I'm sure in the next meeting as well, we will cover again how we measure the ecosystem services that we rely on in a way that's meaningful, as well as community values as well, and community assets too.
And further, more communication, this is the second meeting I've been to. Is there any, have you got a list of all the stakeholders, contact them, things like that, that people want to carry on further discussion?
We do have.
We have an email listserv of over 11,000 people. I know that's about an eighth of the county, but we invite people. We have magnets if you want to pass them out. We don't collect email addresses. We can't send emails to everybody. But we encourage you to sign up for our email list, and you'll get a blast every 2 weeks telling you what the team is up to, what Board of County Commissioner and Planning Commissioner meetings we're doing, and so we encourage you to sign up.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
So I'll make one comment and it's another thing. When the comp plan thing started, the first thing that the county had to do was decide what their growth rate was going to be for the next 20 years. And they made a decision before they had any of the data about how much water do we have on this island and is it sustainable? And I haven't heard anything other than the county saying, oh, we've got enough water for 30 years. Well, that's not enough. So how is it that we're running ahead with the comp plan and making all these decisions to put 20,000 more people in Oak Harbor when God knows if they're going to have any water? So it's about what is the carrying capacity of this island? And, and is that capacity going to reduce as climate change happens, as we get hotter and drier and all of that? A lot of the stuff I've heard about, well, historically, historically, it's like a county.
Can I have perspective on that? This is a planning exercise. So, growth is anticipated to happen. No one can say growth can happen or can't happen. People have the ability to relocate and participate in different ways. What I understand the comprehensive planning to do is to establish goals and policies for if and when that growth happens here. It may happen, and if our goals and policies aren't in place, then we find ourselves in a situation where we're reacting, not necessarily preparing in an organized, responsible manner. So I think that's important to remember that, no matter what's happened before, we need to look at where we are right now and how growth could potentially impact what we're doing moving forward. And how are we gonna prepare if all of these things come to fruition?
Except that part of it has to do with land use plan. Right now, we got, our 40s, and I've heard people say, oh, we can just chop those up into, 2-acre lots. We got 2-acre lots, you got lots more hard pan, you got much less aquifer return, you got lots more people, all of that. And so a lot of it comes down to, I can't come to this island, there's no land for me to buy. If we're not cutting up all the land so that it's in smaller and smaller pieces so that we can build more houses, then I have to find a house elsewhere. So it's all of a piece.
Yeah, the question is it ethical and or legal, or both, some version of it, to be opening up development when you can't assure water over that household's reasonable horizon? And the truth is we can't because we don't know. And so, you can't stand up and there and say that everything's hunky-dory without the data to back it up. And so I think all of us are just saying, show us the data and we'll go along. But we're not being shown that, yet the gears are still moving forward at full speed.
I just think that it's important to recognize that we may become a climate refuge and that there will be, I think right now we're seeing voluntary climate migrants from other parts of the nation and world. And within most of our lifetimes, we're going to see involuntary climate migration. We're already seeing it in other places. And so I don't think the question is, can we just lock the gates and say no more people because we're not sure how many resources we have here? But the question is, can we have a shift in worldview to match our community's stated values so that we live within the constraints of the natural systems that are present? And so, I think that if we were to think about the carbon footprint of the average American versus the carbon footprint of a person living in a developing nation, we'd see a really big difference. And if we were to look at the average home size for the average American, we'd see a really big difference looking across class, lower, middle, and upper class, looking across nationality and citizenship and other demographic differentiators that have to do with generational wealth and systemic oppression. And so I think for the comprehensive plan process to be useful, we have to think about how do we live equitably and compassionately in balance with the resources and the systems of nature and society in Island County, not forgetting Camino because they're underrepresented here in Coopville because it's a heck of a long commute, but they have their own unique challenges and issues. And I just think, as Anne so wisely pointed out, we're getting started with a lot of our comprehensive planning before we have the data that we need. And we're not saying we need that data to reinforce the idea that we lock the gates. We're saying we need that data so that we reinforce the idea that we make really wise decisions and really expertly use what we have.
Yeah, I think collection of data and having that data and leveraging local research institutions, best available science, as well as leveraging what our neighbors are doing as well, seem to be really common themes, not only in this workshop, but in the previous one as well.
And to ensure that we're not burdening staff further, already limited bandwidth, these may be 3 RFPs that go out that are very specific about quantifying those things that we're talking about. And I think we should look to the surrounding counties to see how they did it, who they used, what we can leverage for dimes on the dollar, maybe, because a lot of it's reproducible. But I think that's, it would give confidence to the results as well if we knew that politics wasn't moving the needle at all and that it was really the data as it stands.
And it would
One way to handle the resource limitations is to have building codes, LID or low impact development concepts within the codes for new construction. Now, I don't know, it's not part of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan can mention that, to be the incentive for code change. To get as much, keep as much rainwater on the island and get it into the ground, recharging as possible. If you, at least with the new construction.
Carrying capacity is no secret. It's, you gotta extract less than you recharge. Once we figure that out, we got our carrying capacity. So that's it. I mean,
And we can have
we just
more.
gotta get the
more-
data to get figured out, recharge and extraction. It's all there.
Yeah, we can have more people.
I do wanna, I'll go to you.
I don't hear very well, so I haven't picked up on everything that's been said, but one of the things I'd like to point out is when you're calculating how much water we have and how much we can use, our drinking water is underfoot. Now it's being replenished by rainfall and also by pollution. But what we have to have is an excess, because the excess will keep the aquifer replenished and it drains off to the ocean, whatever, it keeps it clean. Otherwise, it's gonna go back.
We do have only a minute or two left, or
This has been very rich, worthwhile, thank you, long overdue. Is there anybody here from,
We invited one of the stakeholders from Camino, but he wasn't able to make it last minute, so, we're hoping he attends the Camino, but certainly we know there's a gap there, and we want to do more outreach from Camino to represent their input on the climate.
I would certainly encourage that.
I appreciate that.
We're doing 2 public meetings on Camino, working with our community-based organization partner in November. So we're doing these for outreach.
So, perfect.
So we have one more workshop on Friday.
Yes.
On heat. And I do want to say, I'd like to, someone's using this, but I'm wondering if we can reserve a little bit of time to summarize some key themes that we've heard in the 3 workshops and to talk next steps on how we're going to use the information gathered at these workshops and move forward with the climate element, just to kind of level set on this. I think this has been a wonderful start to the conversation, and we know it's just a start. There's a lot more work ahead of us, so we'll talk next
Let's use
steps.
our last 10 seconds to give these guys a round of applause.
Good job.